Hello everyone, my name is John Euler and this is Journey to Healing, and we are going to be talking about stress. Do you have any? What happens if you miss the warning signs? Stress is something that so many of us can relate to that it's the number one reason people seek out therapy. Though there can be lots of reasons and sources of stress, do you know what the number one reason is for stress? We are going to look at the next on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? John Euler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. John has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And John Euler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Hello everyone, my name is John Euler, this is Journey to Healing, and welcome back for another edition of our journey into trying to figure out what are the sources of internal pain that we're dealing with. How can we move forward? And we're going to talk about stress today, but we're going to talk about it within the context of the source. Where does it come from? And what can we do about it? Like if you're behind the microphone or sitting in my studio, which is my office, and you had a bunch of buttons in front of you like I do, you could push the wrong button. And before you know it, you're introducing your program, but you are actually pushing the wrong button. So we'll get through this little source of stress as we look at what are the issues that are keeping us stuck. We are doing a very extended series on grief and loss, but we are camping on the issue of boundaries. Why boundaries? Boundaries really will make or break anyone in terms of the stress that they're going through, the fallout of not having effective boundaries. As a matter of fact, and as I mentioned in the introduction, the vast majority of stress that will bring someone into counseling, though the client typically is not aware of it, it has to do with boundaries. It has to do with boundaries in the here and now, or boundaries in the past that are still playing out, really ineffective boundaries, and the effect that had on me. So now I think that I have left the past. I may think I have left home, but the question is, has home left me? So I think by leaving, and if I was raised in California, I go to the East Coast. If I was raised in New York and I go to California, it's all behind me. Why? Because I'm assuming that the source of stress is geographical. There are issues with geography. There are different kinds of people wherever you go in the world, but you still deal with people and you still take you with you. So the question is, how are you doing with your relationships? The extent to which you are honest and able to be honest is the extent to which you are finding yourself either stressed or not very stressed, and most people have stress. So we're going to look at stress within the context of ineffective boundaries. We have looked at what are the kinds of people that we need to have boundaries with? What are the kinds of people that will produce boundary violation that is significant enough that there will be a ripple effect? So stress is an accumulation of emotions, reaching for the magazine again. So you see our little guy here. As a matter of fact, on the back page, it's so excellent. Time Life Time Life also has the same edition, so Health Magazine. But if you flip it over, look at the poor gal. I mean, we all can relate to that, right? So the question is, what causes this kind of stuff? Well, you first have to understand what is stress. Stress is an accumulation of emotions that has not been able to be dealt with or kept current with. So it's like I've stuffed stuff in boxes, and these boxes are just piling up. And so I have to stuff them away somewhere. And so it's almost metaphorically, it's like you have a closet or a trap door and you keep shoving and shoving and shoving. And before you know it, you can't shove it anymore. So it's not funny, but right, it starts building and building. And since we are body, soul, and spirit, mind, will, and emotions, the ills of one will affect the ills of the others. So if we do not keep current with our stress, our bodies will start to feel that. Stress is the result of a disconnection between our left and our right brains. Our left brain will tell us about the here and now and facts and details and what's going on around us. Our right brain, because we are human, will tell us about the meaning and the implications of things. So if I've gone through certain things that I cannot take the time, for whatever reason, if I haven't been able to take the time to work through what it means and the implications of what has just happened, then I will stuff that and I will continue to just push on. I will keep it moving. But the question is, what happens? What happens with the impact of that? It's like a fighter jet breaking through the sound barrier. I have not had that experience. I would love to, but what happens if it were to break through? Maybe a pilot can tell me, but I would imagine with that sonic boom, that's very dramatic, but then it becomes very quiet. I have seen a fighter jet blow past in an air show. It was an F-18, I think. Faster than the speed of sound. It was at the El Toro air show out in Southern California, and the jet took off and went out over the Pacific Ocean so as not to break any windows. He circled back around, and you couldn't even see him coming. As a matter of fact, you couldn't move your head fast enough. But it was absolutely silent. But then the seemingly disconnected power came by. That's what happens if I just keep going and keep it moving, but I've been through things that are significant. So it will pile up. Stress is the result of an inability to discern what's going on in my life with respect to issues of emotional irresponsibility. And that has to do with people. So life in general can be difficult. Of course, we live in a fallen world and life is difficult. We will go through things. We'll go through quote unquote natural loss, and there's nothing natural about it. But then you add people to the mix, and now we have a whole different ballgame. We have issues of potential irresponsibility. We have covered that extensively up to this point in previous podcasts. If you would like to review past podcasts, and there will be additional ones being added. I think I'm about 4 behind. You can go on to SurvivorSupport.net, and you can look under the tab called Podcasts and begin to review past podcasts where we look at what are the kinds of people that will create issues, and we reference the term that Jesus used in the New Testament. We reference the word or the term pigs. Do not cast your pearls before swine. That's in Matthew chapter 7, verse 6. So he talked about a certain category of people who are pigs. And so we're not name calling, we're just being very descriptive. So part of the problem is if you have a lot of stress, you probably have people in your life that are piggish by degree and morphing ever into increasing pigs. As a matter of fact, we have one of the podcasts called How Big of a Pig and the Warthog Assessment. So I recommend you go back and you kind of follow through and discern how big of a pig. Because if you have somebody who's a selfish pig in your life, you need to have boundaries or very natural and predictable things are going to happen. That's different than human error. And again, in those podcasts, we lay out the difference so you can distinguish. Stress is the result of my denying the reality of the situation when boundaries need to be implemented in incremental ways. So I'm denying it, I'm excusing things away, and I'm excusing away the damage that's being done from the injustice that's being wrought, that's being perpetrated, really. The oppression. So I'm making excuses for that, and I'm choosing to turn a blind eye to that which I never should. Why? Because the fallout is going to be significant on me and others. So what is the cost of not having boundaries? Well, we certainly saw it in the magazine again. That's the cost. But beyond that, how about relationally? If you wait to implement boundaries, and that's very different than the minor infractions in life. And again, go back and review the podcast, How Big of a Pig? And there's also one, the 3 things that will cause me to not see a pig or prevent me from seeing pigs. Okay, that'll help you begin to understand that there is a certain category that beyond which we shouldn't be dealing with someone. Okay, so the high cost of waiting too late to implement boundaries with those who are clearly harmful, okay, who are malignant narcissists, or even worse. And we looked at Mother Gothel. We did a couple series on Mother Gothel versus Rapunzel in the movie Tangled. We showed some film clips from The Great Santini with Robert Duvall. So that father, the Great Santini, a military pilot, but this father was a pig. We looked at Mommy Dearest. I think it's Joan Crawford. Real story, right? What happens to those kids that live under that? They will spend the rest of their life trying to get over that. So what happens if we ignore those boundaries that need to be established? There'll be enduring and unnecessary stress, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and compulsive behaviors. And I pretty much covered the vast majority of mental health issues for which people seek counseling. So on some level, when somebody comes to me with counseling issues, I know that somewhere in their life, they're having difficulties with boundaries. And so I begin a journey with them to begin to investigate what is going on. Why can't the person be honest? Doesn't make them good, bad, or indifferent, but the question is, where in their life are they not being honest? Honest with themselves and honest with other people. If you do not have boundaries, you will have wasted your pearls. Jesus said, do not cast your pearls before swine. We went into that in depth in the past, but suffice it to say, your pearls are what is important to you because you are important. That is your time, effort, energy, resources, your opinion, your preferences, your voice. There will be lost hopes and dreams if you do not have boundaries. There will be lost potential. Your life was not designed to be relegated to a prison if you don't deserve to go there. And selfish people are expert at putting people in prison. And little by little, they will chip away at them to where the person will actually walk into their own prison. And they will settle for that which they're not supposed to settle for. And now there's lost years, there's lost time, lost relationship with your kids. If you wait too long, a strange phenomenon will happen. Your kids, because they're young, will not be able to discern and distinguish. Maybe someday down the road, once the damage is done, and you have an opportunity now to prevent that. But if you wait too long, the kids are wanting you to have boundaries. The kids are tired of this. If you, even for good reason, and that's the hardest situation because it's usually for good reason. You are on the receiving end of this. You are feeling the stress, but you are denying what you're feeling, or you may be fully in touch with it, but you are not making a change for fear of, and we'll tackle that in a moment. But also there may be some mistaken notions. In past podcasts we've looked at what are the things that will hinder me from having boundaries. Mistaken notions are a big part of that. Those that have been a part of church for any period of time. We've heard enough verses that can be taken out of context to where I believe that no matter what, I'm to stay with this person. That is not true whatsoever. Proverbs chapter 26, 27, and 28 are filled with directives, what you should or should not do with a fool. And a fool and a pig are the same animal. And you need to know there's a progression. And by the time somebody reaches that level, time for talking is over. You need to begin to implement some significant changes. If you don't, there's hurt going on. The kids will be on the receiving end of that. No child benefits from being and remaining in a home where there is constant tension. That is not healthy, that is not helpful, and it will produce anger and it will produce resentment. And the quickest way to ensure that your kids, when they grow up, will never darken the door of a church again is what? You show them an example where you can't control your own anger, or you tolerate, or you put up with somebody who has shown over a period of time, certainly over years, but I'm recommending you don't wait that long. But if they've demonstrated that it's always something and it's never enough, you need to understand it's not love anymore. You now are enabling. You are facilitating selfishness, and you need to stop it. Why? Because oppression is being perpetrated. The kids will be impacted. They will end up, since the flip side of hurt is anger, they will be angry. They are not responsible for being angry, what they do with it, but oftentimes what happens to anger? It becomes resentment, then bitterness. Now, they are responsible for that if they end up becoming bitter adults. But at the same time, and if you did that, if you facilitated that, and then you suddenly see the light, and we covered that in one of the podcasts as far as what happens when the decent parent finally sees who they're dealing with, then you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt by taking radical steps and radical boundaries so that the kids can see that had you seen then what you see now, you would have done the same thing. Now, they'll still have to work through things, and if they are unforgiving, that becomes their issue. But at least you've done the best, the most, the only thing you can. What also happens, or what else happens if you don't have boundaries? Again, potential lost relationship with your kids, your extended family, who matters, because selfish people that have morphed into professional-grade selfish people, narcissists or pigs, they will start to isolate you. They'll isolate you from family, from extended family. They'll isolate you from friends. Why? Because little by little, they know if you have contact with the outside world, then you can get outside information. You can start to hear input from others that can give you some information to compare and contrast. And you may start to have people say, you know what, this doesn't sound healthy. So the selfish person who starts to morph into a pig becomes equivalent of a cult leader. And cults have to isolate, and they limit outside contact. They'll invert it. They'll say, we are a family. We don't trust the outsiders. We can't trust those outside our door. So whether a church or an actual cult, or although a cult never calls itself a cult, right? But so many families who find themselves in very fundamentalist, actually one of two extremes, the charismatic or fundamentalists, there will be very much that feel. What else will happen? A life of regret, of not having seen the warning signs for what they are and not having taken steps sooner. You'll find yourself having to dig yourself out of a hole that you didn't really create. It's the selfish person that did it. You were just trying to do your best. But once you see it, and again, listen to the podcast, How Big of a Pig, to dispel any doubts. You will invite disrespect and pain, meaning the person will continue to do what they're going to do, and you don't get any spiritual brownie points for this, because the Lord's telling you not to cast your pearls before swine. It is unnecessary and unproductive pain. Nothing good comes from this. Jesus tells you not to. Paul talked about, do not suffer with fools. Do not tolerate them. In 2 Peter chapter 2, at the end of the chapter, verse 22, he uses the same kind of wording, that we have to be able to discern. So we'll invite unnecessary pain, unnecessary disrespect. We will be poor stewards. At the end of our lives, when we're talking to the Lord, He's not going to, if we clearly knew, that conversation may go a little different. He might be asking, why? Why did you wait so long? What part of this didn't you understand? So if you're within the sound of my words, or this podcast, maybe He's talking to you right now, which means He's giving you permission. You can create kids with serious mental health issues and serious personality issues, and you can have a damaged relationship with your kids. If you see kids that are acting out, oftentimes they are acting out their anxiety. Anxiety, the vast majority, anxiety all the time is adrenaline. Adrenaline comes from the fight-flight syndrome. That means a part of you feels backed into a corner or losing control. That's a position you never should have been put in. That is self-injurious, therefore it's hurtful, and the flip side of hurt is anger. So depression, the vast majority of depression, vast majority of anxiety, it's all anger under the surface. What can happen? A number of weeks ago, before I started recording the podcast, I reviewed a longitudinal study, one of a kind, that was done a number of years ago by Dr. Wallerstein. She has since passed away. She was out of UC Berkeley, and she worked with over 100 kids. Actually, I think a few hundred for starters, and she tracked them over the course of 25 years. Now think about that. That means if a child is young, maybe 2, then you're working with their parents for a long period of time. But what happens if you start with a teenager who's 16? That means they're going to grow up. They're going to move on with their life. They're going to possibly be married or start their own family. And with their permission, you touch base with them. She was wanting to find out, because that's when the no-fault divorce was coming into vogue, or starting to make its way through legislatures and then courts. And the question is, will kids be okay? Will they be resilient? On the one hand, it is better than staying in, a dysfunctional, a really harmful situation. Okay, but I'm not suggesting divorce right away. I'm suggesting separation. Okay, a selfish person, if you separate from them, they will not stay static. They'll either get better or they'll get worse. So you need to focus on getting yourself together, protecting your kids, getting your life established. Do not start dating. And you will see that the selfish person will either get worse, and they'll eventually become unfaithful, and then you are free, or they will either come to their senses. Selfishness always grows, and therefore a selfish pig is on a roll. It's like a snowball. Okay? But what happens when kids have gone through a lot of hurtful stuff that ended in divorce because of a selfish person? So I want to tie 2 things together. We have a really selfish person that has created a really stressful home environment, and they lived under that until things fell apart. So better the injured spouse were to have acted sooner, rather than waiting, and now the kids go through all sorts of stuff. So in that case, when a parent waited too long to put boundaries up, to separate, before it got to the point and degenerated, here are the effects of living under that kind of stress. Okay? Dr. Wallerstein found out, or discovered through children of divorce, that they had an expectation of failure. And that was based upon an internalized image of failure. So these young people, now they grow up, they're young adults, well into their adulthood as well. And they seem to have a sense of Murphy's Law about them, that this black cloud seems to be hanging over them, almost as though everybody else is eligible for success except for them. And that is the makings for self-sabotaging. The second characteristic is a fear of loss due to early anxiety about abandonment by one or both parents. So again, I want to focus on the selfish partner. Now, it takes 2 to tango, but you can have somebody that really is the majority of the problem. And the other spouse, then, their issue is they're not implementing boundaries. So if a child stays in a stressful environment long enough and sees eventually the disintegration of that marriage, it'll have lasting effect. And that's why I'm advocating sooner rather than later for separation. Okay, and then at least it's calm, and the kids won't probably have some of these or as much. Okay, so fear of loss. They just kind of feel like the next time they start to have a relationship, what's going to happen. So they may have sort of a kind of a dependency or fear of getting close. In an extreme situation, you can have borderline personality disorder, which is a back and forth kind of crazy making feel. There's a good book called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. And that feels crazy making. Why? Because they want you close and then they push you away. Where does that come from? Typically, early on, it has to do with bonding. That bonding was impacted in a negative way and it never had a chance to properly form. Fear of change, since experience has shown them that it's usually for the worse. Well, you can't go through life, since life's going to throw curves at you, and developmentally, everybody goes through every life, and every family goes through stages. You leave home, that's a change. You meet someone and you get married, there's another passage, a stage. The first child, there's another stage. The second child, that's another stage. First child goes to school, another change. The first child graduates. And there's probably kids along the way behind that. So graduation then, and then launching, leaving the nest, and then eventually empty nest. Why is it that there are so many divorces now when kids finally leave home? Because there's been a lot of stuff under the surface, but fear of change. And so if deep down inside a person fears change, they are going to be finding themselves certainly in a rut, but they also won't get outside of their comfort zone. Why? For fear of change. How about this? Fear of conflict, because it leads to explosions or the impulse to escape. We call that, Murray Bowen does, I do as well, emotional reactivity. That has to do with going one extreme or the other, either reacting up, meaning too much, too high, escalating a situation, or an emotional cutoff, where not only do I cut my emotions off, but then I just leave. Because I haven't, if I'm that kid, and I haven't had a chance to watch effective conflict resolution where people are able to express themselves and finish sentences and know that even though there's some intensity, that it's going to be safe, and that's how you work things out, then I will not know. I won't know that the relationship can survive. And so I may also say, you can't fire me, I quit. Meaning, I'll leave the relationship early. How about fear of betrayal? And so that can lead to jealousy. That can lead to over-controlling kinds of behavior. Why? Because they've seen so much of it. And fear of loneliness, something leading to self-destructive choices in partners or self-sabotaging relationships with good partners. So they may choose bad choices. You look at how many women go to bars and think that's going to produce something positive. I'll get some mail on that, but it's true, right? You're dealing with a guy that shows plenty of evidence about this idea of the bad boy syndrome. So this woman's going to tame the savage beast, and how does that work out? It always works out predictably not well. So the woman gets used. If you think that you're going to kiss enough toads and anything productive is going to come out, except for warts on your lips, so to speak, right? There are no princes in toads. The myth of, and the dangerous myth of 50 Shades of Grey, apparently the premise is that this guy is wounded and he's working out his woundedness on this woman who he's doing horrible things to that they used to do in the Middle Ages for torture. We call it BDSM, or bondage. Okay, ladies, no man should ever put his hands on you like that. That is warped and deviant, and he's into porn, and bad things are going to happen. So nothing positive comes from what's called kink. Zero. Do not deal with a man that's into porn. Nothing good will come from that. Okay, but you will not be able to heal a wounded person. Hurt people hurt people. Let me redefine that just before our break, which is this. Are hurt people that have been hurt, are they reactive? Yes. Do they need to control themselves, though? Yes. Is it understandable? Yes. Well, do we cut them some slack? No. Yes. We cut them grace, but truth says what? Speaking the truth in love says, you are accountable for your actions, and you do not get a pass when it comes to the hurtful or angry words or behavior that issue forth from you. You are not responsible for what you're given, but you are responsible for what you do with it. And if you do not curb your behavior, and if you do not check what is coming out of your mouth, then you will morph into, because you will cut yourself some slack so much that you run the risk of morphing into a pig. And then guess what? All your pain that is legitimate, that the Lord wants to help heal, you don't get to deal with that yet. Because why? You're dishing it out. And until you stop being hurtful, your pain doesn't count. It counts, but you don't get to deal with it with the Lord's help until you stop being hurtful. So until you're done being hurtful, your pain doesn't count. And the only thing that counts is you beginning to do a searching and fearless moral inventory, just like in Matthew 5, where it says if you're at the altar and you are presenting your gift and you remember that you've been hurtful, stop playing church, you get up and you go make it right. Why? So that you can receive grace, so that things can begin to calm down, so you can get the help that you need and the healing that you need. What happens, though, in our lives if someone doesn't stop, if someone continues to morph, whether they've been hurt or not? What do we do, and what happens again if we don't have effective boundaries? We will deal with that on the other side of the break. We'll be right back.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by John Euler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with John Euler about your situation or in having John conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.